I'm going to be reviewing the new Tier 8 Russian Premium tank destroyer, the SU-130PM. Yes, another Russian premium tank here. This is going to be pretty well received, though, in some other, some good, some bad ways. Um, Pretty much, it's going to be closely compared with, with the Skorpion G. It's high alpha, little armor, decent mobility, pretty good flexibility for a TD because it has a limited turret, unlike the Skorpion G that has a fully rotating turret. This one, as you can see here, has gun traverse limits here of 77.5 degrees. So pretty darn good, though. The SU-130PM, though, plays very similar to the Skorpion G with some very important differences, for better and for worse. Mostly better, though, to where a lot of you that watch my streams on Twitch know that the Skorpion G, I don't always play the best. Like, it's a fun tank. Not exactly the best tank for my playstyle, but the Skorpion G is a pretty awesome tier 8 tank in its own right, even not even considering the premium aspect of it, where people that like that are going to love the SU-130PM. Skorpion G, but with Russian bias. Anyway, getting into things though, before I get to the comparison, I'm going to do a quick comparison against the Skorpion G, and then popping into, I only had to honestly play a few battles in this thing so far. Basically 3 to get myself an ace tanker, but I'm basically averaging 2,700 damage in this thing. Granted, it's a small sample size here. When it comes to average experience, and comparing that to my Skorpion G here, so 2,700 average damage compared to 1,800 in the Skorpion G. Again, small sample size, but so far I'm enjoying this tank pretty well. Getting into the size of this before I go into the comparison, and then after that going into the replay. Basically, this thing is a lot smaller than the Skorpion G in good ways, to where they have the same gun depression, but the gun doesn't really have much over, as far as the turret hanging over the gun, sticking up on the SU-130PM, compared to the Skorpion G that has that big forehead you get hit on a lot, trying to like peek over hills and like small obstacles. So that's SU-130PM's one kind of strength that isn't listed in like a hard stat, just going off of the size. Now, the Skorpion G obviously is much taller, boxier. Lengthwise is similar on both, but you can see that the Skorpion G is just downright larger than this thing. Both have no armor. Where the Skorpion G, people, if you play it aggressively, which I usually, you get absolutely torn to shreds if you're spotted. The SU-130PM, you can actually hide behind like small hills, stuff like that. Not so much in the Skorpion G. So that's one of the big differences you're not going to see in like the listed values. That it honestly really matters just playing this thing. So getting into things, SU-130PM, 520 damage per shot compared to the 490 on the Skorpion G. That's basically the best upside of this tank over the Skorpion G, which is already a great tank. 520 is just downright nasty against tier 6s, tier 7s, really hurts tier 8s, to where it's going to insulate you a little bit more from RNG, to where if you get lower rolls, they'll be better on the SU-130PM than the Skorpion G. And honestly, it stings tier 9s and 10s a lot more too. So great on the alpha department. Penetration-wise, 243 millimeters on the 130PM. Skorpion G a little bit more there. Now the premium shell on the 130 is a heat shell, 320 millimeters a pen. Skorpion G gets a pretty awesome APCR shell, 311, so a little bit less, but most people would conclude APCR is probably the better premium round because heat has some drawbacks to it. Now, getting into some things, rate of fire is higher in the Skorpion G, but skipping down here to the average DPM, Skorpion G just barely nudges it out. Now this comparison's 100% crew, no brothers in arms, no crew skills, and then the equipment on it, you can kind of see, I forgot to mention it, just optics and a rammer and a camo net. Both don't have access to vents. Now, basically, nudging it out a little bit in DPM 19, literally it doesn't matter. SU-130PM with the 30 more damage per shot, much better considering the DPM is basically the same. Getting to the gun traverse, higher in the 130PM, noticeably slow on the Skorpion G sometimes when you're trying to track like a light tank, so on and so forth, especially if you're trying not to move your hull if you have your camo net on. 130 PM, it definitely is noticeably better, even though it's just like a 4 degrees difference. Gun depression, like I was talking about, is the same, but basically with the higher size of the Skorpion G and also that forehead over the gun, the SU-130PM actually can fight fairly decently on hills. Like it's definitely not as good as other tanks that have like -8, -10, so on and so forth gun depression. But compared to Skorpion G, it doesn't feel completely terrible playing the thing on a hill. Let me leave it at that. Where when you add in, the smaller size and basically the gun placement, it feels pretty nice. It's comfortable, but definitely not like an American tank, but much better. Gun elevation is flat out better on the 130 PM. The Skorpion G can't point its gun up much, comes into play much, if you're aiming, say up a ridge, or if for whatever reason you're like going down a hill and there's an enemy far away, you might not be able to point up all the way. 130 PM doesn't have that problem. I was talking about the gun traverse limits. 130 PM, obviously, it can't fully traverse its gun all the way around with its turret. It is a negative, but it is basically you're able to work with it. The Skorpion G, of course, will be better, especially fighting like closer up or in like cities and stuff. Whereas the SU-130 PM, if someone flanks you, definitely a negative because you won't be able to turn your gun around all the way. So lights and stuff will definitely pose a problem if they get behind you and like track you, so on and so forth. Aiming time here, small difference. Skorpion G is better here in both aiming time and accuracy by a bit. Where yes, it's noticeable, but 0.34 isn't too bad considering the high alpha, the good penetration on both tanks. But Skorpion G is the more accurate of the two. It will matter, of course, against like tier 9, tier 10, like heavily armored tanks. But for most tanks that you're facing, depending on matchmaking and stuff, the accuracy, yes, it's a negative on the SU-130 PM, but it's not enough of a negative to like just clearly say like, oh, this is crap compared to the Skorpion G. But yes, Skorpion G will be able to hit weak spots better. Hit points. Skorpion G has 50 more. Armor, basically the same. Yes, a little bit lower on the SU-130 PM, but if anything is going to pen you, say with HE on one, it's going to pen you on the other. Basically, the hit point difference, 52. It matters, but Skorpion G, with the larger size, technically, which is why I mentioned that, basically, the Skorpion G is, with the added HP, it doesn't really help out as much as you might think. Now, mobility. This is an important difference between the two. You're going to see, as I'm talking here, there's going to be little clips, hopefully, flying up above me, showing the SU-130 PM and Skorpion G side by side, where basically Skorpion G is much heavier here than SU-130 PM. So, not that you're ramming things in a Skorpion G, but it does matter. Things are going to be able to ram you a lot better in the SU-130 PM. Engine power, a lot stronger on the Skorpion G, but the most important thing, specific power, a little bit better on the Skorpion G, where you might say that it's not enough of a difference to really make it feel different. Basically, side by side, like comparison with this, the Skorpion G is noticeably better than the SU-130 PM. Now, looking on like tanks.gg and other basically websites as far as like ground resistance and stuff, the tanks are virtually, not to say the same, but they're basically the same as far as those values. Unless they're probably displaying the wrong value. You can't see terrain resistance in the client here, but the Skorpion G is faster. Noticeably, the specific power is just a little bit better, but it's noticeably better as far as mobility, except for when it comes to the top speed. SU-130 PM beats it top speed wise, and 5 kilometers an hour is noticeable both going down hills, but Skorpion G is better going up hills. And also on level ground, it accelerates much better than SU-130 PM, but it does traverse a little bit slower as far as its hull. So the SU-130 PM is able to turn a lot better and weave in and out of things. So that'll help in cities, but the lack of a fully traversable turret will hurt the SU-130PM. Whereas the Skorpion G turns a little bit worse, but it has that fully traversable turret. So a little bit positive and negative there between the two. Concealment here, SU-130PM flat out better. I know a lot of people are going to complain about that. It's better pretty much across the board, but the way camouflage works, roughly, it's based off of the height of the tank, and the tanks are pretty different as far as height-wise, so that's why there's a pretty large difference. Concealment, though, is pretty awesome on the SU-130PM, especially once you, say, get a camo net, camo crew, so on and so forth. It's going to be pretty stealthy. View range, basically identical, and signal range. Another thing not on here is fire chance. SU-130PM, only 12%, to where you will get set on fire from the front, but you're going to get pinned anyway everywhere. Skorpion G is 20%, so much higher on the Skorpion G, so it's a pretty noticeable difference to where, yes, you're going to get pinned anyway. I just want to double check I didn't get it. Yeah, 12% on the SU-130PM. Usually it's the, vice versa. And I just had like a brain fart. I'm like, did I switch them? Because the Skorpion G, as you see here, goes up to 20%. Usually it's vice versa, to where Russians have a pretty high chance of getting set on fire. But anyway, popping into the basically the ace tanker match on El Haloof here. It only took me 3 battles to get this. My other battles in it were pretty darn awesome too. The SU-130PM. Where, comparison-wise, comparing it to the Skorpion G, they both have their own little distinct differences, but I like this tank better. But yeah, let's switch over to here. We have El Haloof. I'm on the southern side, where even though the mobility on this going up a hill is a little bit slower than the Skorpion G, it's still pretty flexible as a TD, to where you can kind of play somewhat differently than you would other TDs. Like the Skorpion G on my team, if he's going to go to the C2 spot, which is where I'm going to be kind of pushing, this thing can fight, like I was talking about in comparison, on kind of hills somewhat a little bit better, where he's going to be at a distinct disadvantage. He's going to stay in the base, unfortunately for him, and kind of rushing out here. Like, the higher top speed on this I was talking about is actually pretty noticeable, to where, I'm keeping up somewhat decently with the P-44 Pantera, LT-432, to where going downhill here, pretty much hitting that top speed pretty well. Where this thing is no slouch when it comes to mobility. It was kind of mentioned that this thing is definitely noticeably slower than the Skorpion G in a lot of spots, but really the Skorpion G just beats it out going up the hill, and on level ground it does accelerate much better. But going downhill, not that you're always going to be doing it, it does beat out the Skorpion G. Now getting up here, 520 damage per shot, to where in a tier 9 match with just 9s and 8s, your alpha, it stings. Luckily my team takes a pretty early lead here, to where you'll notice the on the move accuracy, which I'm just going to, let's just go with that camera instead of using the free camera. Basically the on the move accuracy is pretty darn good, to where, yes, the Skorpion G, it's also fairly decent on that too, but the SU-130PM, it just feels a little bit better as far as like on the move accuracy. You don't bleed as much of your accuracy, but get one decent shot in, to where, you're still playing a TD with no armor. So the threat of getting RD'd or HE'd, or just absolutely gets overwhelmed and massacred, is still pretty high. Where, yes, the gun's awesome on this. The flexibility for a TD is great too. And, flexibility means mobility, and also the somewhat, it's not the best turret at TD as far as flexibility, because it doesn't have that fully traversable, but it's still pretty darn good. Making this push, though, this thing just chews tanks apart, with the higher alpha, basically same DPM as the Skorpion G, where luckily we could flank here, but you just start literally popping people off here. Will this thing replace the Skorpion G? That's something that, you know, I know is going to come up much, and people are going to be screaming about power creep and how this thing is unbalanced. If this thing is basically more broken than the Skorpion G, since it does have positive and negatives, the Skorpion G is just completely unbalanced, which when it was added to the game, it was a little bit too good in my opinion, the Skorpion G. Adding this in though, because it does have slightly worse mobility, except for going downhill, and basically the accuracy is a little bit worse. You know, not as much as I would think that it should be, but it is worse than a Skorpion G. Don't get me wrong. Where, you know, this thing, you can't scream that it's overpowered unless you throw the Skorpion G in that as well, which I know some people do. But the main problem with the Skorpion G right now is people just chuck pure premium out of the thing because you can make just still buckets loads of credits, which I have heat here loaded as well, so I can kind of become basically thrown in there as well. Now, you know, when this thing comes out, as far as crew training goes, it works pretty decently for a crew trainer. As far as the crew size, it doesn't fit every single Russian TD, but as far as the crew setup goes, it's a much better crew trainer than say the Skorpion G for the Germans, which, you know, this thing ends up being an ace tanker to where our team just raffle stomped the enemy, to where, you know, it was pretty much, it wasn't even like a contest, but just kind of showing how this thing could work, being a little bit more flexible. Like, the mobility is still nice, on the move accuracy is decent. It fights a little bit better on uneven terrain than the Skorpion G, to where this thing's going to be a little bit more rewarding for people that play it more aggressively, whereas the Skorpion G penalizes you for being as aggressive, you know, with that larger size and basically that main forehead over the gun. You know, you get penalized a little bit for playing the Skorpion G a little bit more aggressively. But all in all, decent match here, to where our team just honestly raffle stomped the enemy. No other words than that. To where people are going to feel at home when it comes to this tank if you like the Skorpion G, and it's going to be a pretty good pickup, to where you know, ace tanker here. I was pretty surprised it was an ace tanker, to be honest. Like, it's probably because there's not a lot of people playing it, but they do have base values in place to make sure you don't ace it with like 200 damage. But moving on here, you know, easily the most amount of damage, a little over 1100 base experience, to where, yeah, it was a quick match, but this thing, if you just stay alive, much like the Skorpion G, you just rack up damage. That's the main trait of this thing, dealing damage and basically being mobile enough to get to where you need to be when you need to be. And if you screw that up, you're just going to die because you aren't going to survive very long. Credit earning potential. I did use some heat. As you can see, my ammunition, 31,000 for the ammunition replenishment. It is a little bit more costly shell-wise on this thing than the Skorpion G. And credit earning potential will be just a smidgen lower. So take that, you know, with a grain of salt, to where you're still earning a good amount of credits, you know, 79,000 here in total. If you exclude the Twitch Prime one for a little under 15,000 there, you still earn a pretty good amount of credits for dealing a little over 3,000 damage while using a few premium rounds thrown in there, with only one miss and basically 2 total shots didn't penetrate to cause damage. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this replay. Swap it back over here. We'll kind of, you know, tidy up at the end here and go over a little recap. Basically, when it comes down to the comparison between the SU-130PM and the Skorpion G, and whether, you know, this tank is better than it, and also, is this tank going to be worth picking up? So a couple things I talked about during the battle. Shell cost. Just going in a little bit more detail here. You can see a little over 1,200 for the SU-130PM for a standard round, 5,200 for a premium, a little over 1,000 for HE. So shells are pretty expensive on this thing, where if you swap over to the Skorpion G here, almost basically 200 less on the standard round, 400 on the premium round here, and then the HE round's a little bit cheaper too. So you're doing less damage per shot in the Skorpion G, so it's not a direct comparison like one, you know, this is just straight out more expensive and you're going to earn less per shot because you do have that 30 extra damage. But it is something to make note of, because it is a little, even with that damage, it is a little bit more expensive. And if you miss a shot, it's basically going to harm you even more as far as credit potential, earnings, plus the heat rounds being more expensive. And I think that the APCR on the Skorpion G, more people will do better with that, given that heat struggles a little bit against, you know, basically space armor and stuff, tracks, so on and so forth. You know, credit earning potential on this is a little bit worse, unless you perform a lot better in this, which, you know, I love this tank. I only have 3 battles in it so far, but also kind of seeing Wargaming release the stats and stuff, you know, it's pretty fun to play this thing, to where I don't like the Skorpion G much because of the size, and it penalizes you, and basically for playing aggressive, that's kind of how I play. I know it's a TD, and that's just my opinion, but when it comes down to it, the SU-130PM, yes, it has a couple downsides: the no fully traversable turret, slightly worse accuracy, mobility, you know, is a little bit worse unless you're going down a hill where the top speed matters. You know, yes, it has downsides, but I like the higher alpha. The on-the-move accuracy feels better, and, you know, the size is what gets it for me. The crew training aspect too, like right now I have my ISU-152 crew in this, to where, let's pull on things. I have a tech tree mod on here, which I'm probably going to get lost, just because you weren't able to put this tank into the comparison when I made this video. It was kind of locked. So let's see, I'm trying to find, oh, everything's different. If I don't, there we go. That's what I was looking for. It's basically like, when it comes to the crew and stuff, you can see the crew for this tank lines up pretty decently. Like when it comes down to like the 268, you know, the Object 268 version 4, and a few other tanks, you know, it lines up pretty well between basically this tank and also those. Whereas Skorpion G, only having 4 crew members, it won't work as much with German TDs, because when it comes down to it, German TDs, you know, their crews are not 4 people basically at the higher tiers. So the Skorpion G is not a good, you know, basically crew trainer, whereas the SU-130PM is a pretty good crew trainer on top of being a pretty awesome tank to play. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. You know, I rambled on a little bit here, but I tried to do my reviews live for the most part. I used a replay this time just because, you know, I got a pretty decent match there in the beginning, and, you know, might as well just go with that. But, you know, anyway, this tank, I think a lot of people are going to love it. I'm sure it's going to be controversial because, A, it's another Russian premium tank, Russian bias, blah, 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 whatever you want to say. But what it boils down to, yes, I like this tank a lot better than the Skorpion G. Just initial impressions and going into the stats, you know, I like this tank better. Because the Skorpion G, the size with the armor and the flexibility, to me is a little bit worse for things that you can control. Like, yes, if you get flanked in this, you won't be able to point around, but I can usually deal with that. But is this thing like straight out overpowered? If you think the Skorpion G is, sure, this thing's overpowered. Do I think it is? No. Only because a lot of maps, you don't exactly have like the best tank at your disposal when you pick a tank like this, and you have no armor, low HP, and, you know, you can get annihilated by arty. People can swap over to HE and just smack you for a ton of damage. And, you know, you have downsides to where I don't think it's overpowered. It's a really good tier 8 premium. Like the Skorpion G, even though that doesn't mesh too well with me. To where I think people are going to love this. And it has the crew training aspect that the Skorpion G doesn't. So, win-win. But anyway, you know, thanks again for watching this. You know, I'll see you guys if you catch my stream on Twitch. I'll probably be playing this by the time you see this video come out. But anyway, happy holidays, since the holidays are coming here soon, and thanks again for watching. Have a good one.